Okay, so we all say communication is key in relationships, right?
Right.
But putting it into practice, that's a whole other story. You guys wanted us to do a deep dive into the communication mistakes couples make. And we found this lecture that just nails it.
It really does. I mean, the stuff they talk about, it's like sneaky little communication ninjas, these mistakes. And the lecture starts off with this concept that most people don't even realize they're doing, listening to reply instead of listening to understand.
Yeah, I'm totally guilty of that. It's like you're so busy coming up with your next brilliant point, you miss what your partner is even trying to say.
Exactly. The lecture actually drops this stat that just blew my mind. 93% of people think they're above average listeners.
Get out of here.
But the reality is less than half actually are. So it makes you think, are we all just talking past each other?
Probably. The lecture talks about why we do this too. It's all about feeling understood, especially when things get emotional. We're so focused on getting our point across that we forget to really listen.
It's almost like we think listening means we're giving in or something. But real listening isn't about agreeing. It's about connecting, creating a space where both people feel safe to just be themselves.
So true. And that brings us to the next communication pitfall from the lecture, assumptions.
Oh boy, assumptions.
We think we know our partner so well, we start mind reading like we know exactly what they're thinking and feeling.
Dangerous territory.
Big time. The lecture even gives this example with this couple, Lisa and John. John notices Lisa isn't texting as much and jumps to the conclusion she's mad at him. Turns out she's just slammed at work.
Classic.
See, that's what's so tricky about assumptions. You build a whole argument in your head, and it's based on nothing.
And this is where it gets even more interesting. The lecture actually explains why we make these assumptions. This thing called confirmation bias, where our brains look for information that confirms what we already believe, even if it's wrong. So if you think your partner's upset, you'll see everything they do through that lens.
Wow, so our brains are basically messing with us.
Pretty much. And here's where things get really wild. The lecture even mentions how some people actually see this mind-reading thing as a sign of closeness, you know? Like, if you really loved me, you'd just know what I'm thinking.
The infamous mind-reading expectation.
But the lecture makes it clear that that's a one-way ticket to Resentmentville. Real intimacy comes from open communication, not mind games.
Couldn't agree more. It's about being clear and direct with each other instead of relying on hints and unspoken expectations. And that actually leads perfectly into the next communication trap the lecture talks about, passive aggression.
Passive aggression, the master of disguise.
Oh, for sure. Silent treatments, backhanded compliments, conveniently forgetting things. We've all seen it in action and maybe even been guilty of it ourselves.
Right. And the lecture's not messing around when it comes to the damage this behavior can do. It might feel good in the moment to avoid conflict, but passive aggression is like a slow burn. Erodes trust, builds resentment over time.
Like trying to put out a fire with gasoline.
Seriously.
And the lecture actually cites research on this. Apparently, people who use passive aggression in their relationships, more conflict, A&D, less satisfaction, lose-lose situation for sure.
And the lecture really stresses the importance of switching gears from passive aggression to assertive communication, learning to express your needs and feelings directly without attacking your partner.
So instead of sighing dramatically and saying, it's fine, I'll just do it myself, you'd be more like, hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Would you mind lending a hand with this?
Exactly. Owning your emotions and expressing them in a way that's collaborative instead of combative.
So we've tackled listening to reply, assumptions, and the passive-aggressive trap. What other communication blunders does this lecture expose?
Well, the next one is sneaky. It's invalidating your partner's feelings.
Oh, I've been there.
I mean, it usually comes from a good place. Like, you want to make them feel better, right?
Right.
But the lecture's like, nope, this backfires big time.
Yeah, it's like when your partner is stressed out about something and you're all, don't even sweat it, it'll be fine. You think you're helping, but they just feel like you're brushing them off.
Exactly. The lecture gives this example, Mike and Sarah. Sarah is super anxious about something, and Mike instantly jumps in with, there's nothing to worry about.
Thanks.
He means well, but Sarah feels totally dismissed.
Yeah, I can see how that wouldn't go over well. The lecture really digs into the whole emotional validation thing, explains why it's so important for relationships to work.
Oh yeah, big time. It explains that when you validate someone's emotions, you're not saying you agree with them, you're just acknowledging their feelings.
Like saying, I see you. I hear your pain. Not trying to fix it or tell them why they shouldn't feel that way.
Exactly. And get this, the lecture says there's research showing that couples who are good at emotional validation, they're actually way more satisfied in their relationships.
Interesting. So it's not just about being nice, it's like actually building a stronger connection.
Totally. And speaking of building something strong, the lecture then gets into something that I think a lot of couples overlook: timing. Might seem like a small thing, but picking the right time to talk can make or break a conversation.
Oh, yeah. Try having a heart-to-heart when your partner just got home from a crazy day at work. Not gonna go well.
Nope. The lecture really emphasizes being emotionally present and ready to have a productive conversation. They even give another example. This couple, Sarah and Tom, they kept having these blowout fights late at night
Oh, I know those
when
fights.
they were both exhausted and cranky. So what did they do? They came up with this thing. The lecture calls it the 24-hour rule. If something came up that could lead to a fight, they agreed to wait at least 24 hours to talk about it.
That's a good idea, like hitting the pause button so things don't escalate.
Right. It's not about avoiding the conversation. It's about having it at a time when you can actually hear each other. The lecture even suggests saying something like, I really want to talk about this, but let's wait until we're both feeling better, maybe tomorrow.
That's so smart. It sets a boundary, but also shows you're serious about working things out.
And that brings us to another big communication pitfall. The lecture talks about treating arguments like a competition.
Oh, yeah. You get so caught up in proving you're right that you forget you're supposed to be on the same team.
The lecture says it like this: when one person wins, the relationship loses. Powerful stuff. Really makes you shift your perspective from me versus you to us.
Like you take off the boxing gloves and remember you're both fighting for the same thing, a happy relationship.
Exactly. The lecture calls it we thinking. Approaching conversations with the goal of finding a solution that works for both of you.
I love that. Like saying, hey, we're in this together. Let's figure this out as a team.
Now, even when couples manage to have good conversations, there's this other hurdle to follow through.
Ugh, tell me about it. Yeah, this great talk, agree on all these changes, and then nothing.
The lecture explains that it often comes down to what they call temporary compliance. It's like when a partner agrees to something in the moment just to keep the peace, but they're not really committed to the change.
Like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. It might look okay from the outside, but it's not fixing the problem.
And the lecture points out that this pattern can really damage trust. It's like saying your words don't mean much.
So how do you break that cycle? What does the lecture suggest?
They've got a great solution: regular relationship check-ins.
Like a tune-up for your relationship.
Yeah, it's like setting aside time to see how things are going.
Ah.
You can talk about past conversations, make sure you're both following through on what you agreed to, and just generally check in with each other's needs and feelings.
Makes sense.
And the lecture suggests doing these check-ins pretty often, maybe weekly or monthly. It's about being proactive, about taking care of your connection.
This lecture is full of good stuff. Like a communication masterclass for couples.
It really is. And in the final part of this lecture, we'll get into some key takeaways, things you can use to build a more fulfilling and communicative relationship.
Awesome. Can't wait to hear it. Stick around, listeners. We're about to dive even deeper. So as we wrap up this deep dive into communication mistakes couples make, you know what really stuck with me from that lecture?
What's that?
It's not about being perfect. It's about like trying to communicate in a way that, really shows respect for the connection you have.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Takes the pressure off, right? Like, we don't have to get it right all the time.
Totally. It's more like saying, hey, we're both human. We're going to mess up sometimes, but let's at least make an effort to talk to each other in a way that says, I care about you in this relationship.
And that intention behind it, that really does make a difference.
For sure.
Because when you think about it, at the heart of any relationship is that feeling of connection, knowing that someone really gets you, even when you're not at your best.
And communication, that's how you get there, right? It's like the tool you use to navigate all the ups and downs of sharing your life with another person.
It's how we let each other know what we need, how we work through problems together, and how we celebrate the good times.
So to everyone listening out there, as you go about your day today, I want you to think about this stuff. Pay attention to how you communicate with your partner. See if you can catch yourself falling into any of these traps we talked about. And most importantly, be kind to yourself in the process.
Definitely. Be kind to yourself and your partner. Change takes time. It's not like flipping a switch. Celebrate the wins. Be honest about where you can both improve. And know that every step you take toward more open and honest communication, it just makes your relationship stronger.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that's about it for our deep dive into communication mistakes couples make.
We covered a lot of ground, right?
We did. Everything from how to really listen to understand, to the importance of timing and validating each other's feelings.
We talked about the dangers of assumptions and passive aggression, the trap of trying to win an argument, and how crucial it is to actually follow through on what you say you're going to do.
Whew. Hopefully this gave you some good insights, maybe even something to talk about with your partner later.
Remember, relationships are always changing, always evolving. There's always room to grow. Keep learning, keep talking to each other, keep choosing each other.
Even when it's hard.
Even when it's hard, yeah. That's where the good stuff happens.
Well said. And on that note, we're going to wrap things up. Until next time, happy communicating.